Bienvenidos to the Bronze Titan podcast on YouTube. I'm your host, Benjamin Ramos. I'm a longtime journalist and Cuba Solidarity activist based here in New York City. And about once a month, I'll be bringing you a podcast from the international movement to end the U.S. blockade against Cuba. On today's segment, we're going to be speaking with Chris Duran of the Venceremos Brigade about their incredible work to take people from the United States to Cuba to see Cuban society and the Cuban Revolution for themselves. Welcome to the Bronze Titan, Chris.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, Chris, let's give some background to our folks. The Venceremos Brigade might be a new concept for some folks that are, in the listening audience. So tell us, what is the VB?
So the Venceremos Brigade is a organization that was founded in 1969 directly in the intentions of Fidel Castro in terms of building solidarity between anti-imperialist organizers and activists here in the United States, in the belly of the beast, and the Cuban Revolution. So we have been in existence since 1969. We are the longest Cuba Solidarity organization in our network of Cuba Solidarity work in North America, which is also another thing. But we are intergenerational, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-sexuality and gender. So we're an ever-growing organization that works to do anti-imperialist work in the spirit of the Cuban Revolution, and bring those lessons also back to organizing work here that we do locally in the United States, so that we have a good grounding in anti-imperialist politics. Whenever we do stuff here as well.
It's really important, Chris, to lay down another foundation, because some people are going to think, oh, this is a great podcast. I'm going to get to learn about how I could get to go to Cuba and lay around on the beach and run around, Havana, and go to the Hotel Cubana and, get myself some good rum. Well, why is it, what is it that we do when we go to the VB? What's that experience like?
Yeah, so it is not a tourist experience. So for one, we do make clear the contradictions that come with tourism and the sort of parasitic relationships that come with that. So we do emphasize that we are going there to work in solidarity with the Cuban people. So just as they get up and go to work every day to help provide for their country, help provide for their revolution, help provide for their people, that is a spirit that we go there. So we have been going there since 1969 with the intention of doing work, productive work for the revolution. And it's all volunteer basis. We're not getting paid for this at all. When we organize for this, we don't get paid for it. We go there to volunteer, to work alongside the Cuban people, and not just use their country as a playground for our personal indulgences, the way that, it's fair that people go on vacation, but again, the tourist industry is one that erases the agency of a lot of countries. And so because Cuba is an independent and sovereign country, they're able to, one, control tourism, but also make sure that it is to their benefit. However, with our organization, we are explicitly going there to do solidarity work and build with the Cuban people, so that we build that internationalism in a very real sense, and not just theoretically.
And it's amazing, the VB's schedule. And folks, I am completely transparent. Chris and I are brigadistas. You're a brigadista, you go one time, you're a brigadista for life. The 4 times I've been to Cuba has been with the Venceremos Brigade. I haven't been to Cuba in over a decade, but the 4 times that I've gone between 2003 and 2011, the work was incredible. We were renovating hospitals. We were doing a lot of agricultural work. We were renovating schools. We were going there and creating a real impact. Again, it wasn't about going and getting your Cuba Libre and then hanging out on the beach. Some of that happened, but that was after a long day of you doing a lot of work and meeting with different folks. So, Chris, let's talk a little bit about like this year. What's happening with the VB? When is the brigade going? What is possibly on the agenda? Whatever it is, you can tell us, and just give some details for folks.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, obviously we do have fun. Uh, the one thing about being in Cuba is that like the culture is very much alive. So you will not be dancing and having fun, but you will also be working. And it's like it's productive work for a purpose. It's not just for you getting paid by your boss that you hate, or for your nonprofit that does builds houses and then goes back and then works for the subsidized by the U.S. state. With another thing to get into, since again the VB is actively opposing U.S. government sanctions against Cuba, including the blockade, including the occupation of Guantanamo, including state-sponsored terrorism watch lists. Um, so again, those are like part of our principles as well. Um, Opposing the illegal imperialist actions of the United States government, and so that also ties in the seriousness of our work. But with that in mind, we have 3 mini brigades coming up this year that we will be, sending out like applications to and like advertising. So the first one is coinciding with the overall May Day Brigade that happens with the National Network on Cuba. We have a Venceremos Brigade contingent that people can apply to go during the week of May 1st, which for people not familiar with that special day, it is International Workers' Day, which in Cuba is a holiday. So they celebrate international solidarity with workers of different industries all around the world to build workers' power. And it's a very special commemoration. It involves the whole country. Like they have celebrations all throughout the country, like every year. And it's really inspiring for folks that, again, that have to live the sort of worker experience in the United States in a capitalist hellhole like this. But we also have a couple more brigades. We have one in July that will probably be coinciding with July 26th, which commemorates the attack on the Moncada barracks by Fidel Castro and the July 26th movement, which is one of their commemorations also of one of the starts of the revolution, the revolutionary movement that resulted in the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. And this will be primarily geared towards like queer LGBTQ plus folks in particular. And so like, that'll be a mini brigade that's like primarily a container for that type of space. And then December, we're going to have another one that will probably coincide with the new year, which is the celebration of the anniversary of the revolution. So New Year's Day is the anniversary of the Cuban Revolution. That marks the day when Fidel and his troops marched into Havana right after New Year's Eve. And that brigade, which is also a mini brigade, will be primarily geared towards people of African descent, indigenous descent, and Palestinian descent from North America. So that's what's coming up. If there are any further developments, I can, obviously send that to you as well. But tentatively, that's what our schedule will be looking at, and that's what we're going to be sending out applications for in the next several months.
Chris, why is it important for people to go to Cuba? I mean, it's again, we talk about the work, we talk about the play, we talk about the experience, but let's talk to some of our folks about, why is it so important that we see this society, this revolution for ourselves, as opposed to, keep reading, watching Fox News and reading everything and believing everything we read on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Why is it so important that we go to Cuba on our own, with the brigade, and see what happens there?
Well, I think for one is like connecting the history of Cuba and the history of solidarity work also with the United States. So again, I think like I mentioned before, one of the biggest parts is like grounding our like local organizing or like local work in this sort of international perspective of where we are like in our global setting and where we are in relation to a country that's very close to us. that has been policy-wise under siege by the United States government since like 1960. So it's important for one to like see the perspectives of Cubans, and how they view the United States, how they view their own lives, what they want their lives to be, how they see their culture, um, and also, just to have a better understanding of what we're fighting for and against in the United States. Because a lot of times people get confused, especially because the United States gives a lot of bonuses to people who get into progressive movements to join academic settings, nonprofits, and stuff like that, and kind of co-ops like a lot of movements away from an anti-imperialist or anti-colonial line, that kind of ends up reproducing the oppressive systems that we live with. And so when we go to Cuba, we have an understanding of like, we have a mission to break down these sort of systems. And also we understand that our place, especially as like colonized people in the United States, like Latinos, African people, indigenous people, Asians, so on and so forth, whose parents like either like are indigenous to here or come from like countries that are colonized by U.S. imperialism, we see like our connection to this wider global struggle where we're not like minorities in this as well. So I think that's also very important. And also like, it's just also very important to see that there is a very different way of life that we could be living. Like the way that Cubans structure their lives and like their existence with socialism is very different from a capitalist sort of existence. And in a lot of ways, like a lot more humane. There's a lot more social solidarity between people. There's a lot more open expression of culture, of thought. That again, if you are paying attention to U.S. media or TikTok or Instagram or things like that, they will not show any of these aspects of the history or culture of a place like Cuba.
Not at all. I mean, Cuba, Cuba is on a list that supports state terrorism. Cuba, allegedly, if you're walking down the street and say, I don't like the government, you're going to be zapped away by some laser that comes from Havana. You're going to be arrested. There's all of this incredible, people are disappeared on a daily basis. It's like, it's really interesting, like the nonsense that comes primarily from a lot of right-wing Cuban conservative forces that come from the South and even on the East and West Coast. We can't forget about the gusanos that are in, California and in New York and New England. But like, I've noticed, Chris, that when I've gone to Cuba, the conversations, and some people may say, oh, you want us to go on your trip, your propaganda pro-Cuba trip. And it's like, I've been to Cuba 4 times. I've had conversations with Cubans in the street, because when you're in the Venceremos Brigade, you're partying, you're learning, you're in different sectors of society, and you're meeting with a lot of different people. And yes, you can openly criticize the government and the secret police will not disappear you. You can have debates. Some people in Cuba are very critical of the revolution. They'll say, listen, our revolution would be better if this were happening instead of that. No, and it's just like, Cubanos are the first ones to say, listen, we're not perfect. We still have racism. We still have homophobia. We still have chauvinism, but we're working on it. And, the reality is, and Chris, I don't know how you feel about this, but a 60-something-year-old revolution doesn't wipe away hundreds of years of capitalist, Western European, Christian thinking. So I agree with you. I think going there and seeing things for yourself and having these conversations, because I have to fight. Chris, have you noticed that? Sometimes I have to tell people, no, not everything is curated. You're not going on a propaganda trip. I mean, is the VB a propaganda trip?
Well, I mean, we do involve political education, but we also realize the fact that we are dealing with like a lot of different ideologies. So like, there's, like you said, like Cubans are not afraid to like let you know what they're thinking. Like that's the one thing. It's like, oh, like, if you say something bad about Fidel, they're going all. It's like, no, they're not. So there's 2 things. Like, for one, that's bull. Like, and also 2, like, like they're also waging an active imperialist struggle against the United States, where they're literally besieged. So, like, if there are measures that they take to like combat certain like ideologies that are pro U.S. or pro capitalist, like it's also in happening in that context. But again, like you said, 1959 is when they had their the triumph of the revolution. So again, you don't erase 500 years of colonialism by the Spanish and then by the United States in 60 years. But again, what we encourage and what we have, like with the VB, and also what we have that we have it in our practice that's a reflection of what we see like comrades doing in Cuba is like active ideological struggle. So like, yeah, you can bring up criticisms and like we'll actively struggle on those things. It's like we're not opposed to like hearing it, but again, one of our like principles is like, you battle like the ideas, not the person. And so, and that's also the thing with like propaganda is like, well, any media is propaganda. So like again, if I'm coming from the left and I'm engaging in propaganda, like yes, I'd like folks to like, impart this type of like knowledge. If we have propaganda, and again, that's one of those things that's kind of used by like capitalist media. They only call what's opposed to them propaganda, but they don't talk about the media work that they do as propaganda.
Absolutely.
So that's also one of the things that like, yes, we are actively combating ideas, and Cuba is a country that has a basis of a socialist revolution. So the ideas that will be mostly in majority expressed will be pro-socialist ideas or anti-imperialist ideas. So
and having criticisms of socialist ideas and having criticisms of the revolution does not equate to being against socialism or against the revolution. It is la batalla de ideas, the battle of ideas. We can all come loving from the revolution, supporting the revolution, and have different ways of thinking. And it's not, again, and this is where, Chris, I've had to have fights with people because people will say, no, they're taught one way and it's a cookie cutter method of thinking in those types of countries. And I'm like, you need to go to that country and see how there is no cookie cutter way of thinking. There's no, there's a foundation of socialist thought in Cuba, and then there's a lot of growth, a lot of evolution, a lot of political nuance that exists there that is beautiful, something that you don't necessarily see in this country. I'll just throw out another fact. When they were working on the Cuban Civil Code and they made it a priority to go to cities and provinces and towns and talk to people, and they literally like surveyed millions of people. When was the last time in the United States there was when was the last time in the United States there was a discussion on, let's say, abortion or something like that, and they were going to every state and city trying to have a discussion about whether, the Supreme Court has the right to take away people's right to reproductive care. So, it's a thing. It's a thing. Jump in, Chris.
Yeah, no, I think that's also the thing. Is like it's not just like the ideas that might be pro-US or pro-imperialist or pro-capitalist are marginalized, not primarily just because the state is like smashing down on people, but because like they're out organized. Like that's the thing that people don't realize about the Cuban Revolution is that it was a mass movement. Like people organized for this, and they continue to organize for this. And so like the revolution is born out of the ideas of the Cuban people. Like again, you can cite in the last 20 years like two processes of constitutional reformation. So I think 2018 they redid the whole constitution, and that was based out of a whole process of communal councils and stuff like that, going and like organizing people in like different communities across Cuba to get their ideas and stuff like that, incorporating that into the process, which again never happens here. And then you have I believe 2021 or 22 the family code. I'm getting the year mixed up, but they redid the family code to basically go away from a lot of patriarchal ideas that came from like the sort of common idea of like the Catholic inspired family in Latin America and things like that, and what the family is and like what kind of rights to a family, exist. And it didn't pass with an overwhelming majority, but like it was like the thing is like mass organizations like and like queer organizations were incorporated into this, and it still passed through a democratic process. And this Cuban government that is so repressive was able to be a container for this to pass. You know, the most progressive family code in pretty much this entire hemisphere.
Absolutely.
And again, it's like it didn't pass for the overwhelming majority. So like again, you see like that these colonial ideas are very much still a part of society as a whole, but like again, you have the basis from which to like actually move forward with. And the one thing that I want to add to that is that like okay, you have this cookie cutter like education there, but it's like first of all, you actually have that here, and secondly, like in a place like Cuba, in the context of like the Caribbean and Latin America, like a lot of people see Cuba a lot differently than the United States sees Cuba. Um, you know, if you look at any public medical system throughout the Caribbean, which again they're fighting about now, you know, Marco Rubio is like trying to sanction Cuban doctors and shit like that in the Caribbean. But like in the Caribbean and also like Latin America and a lot of the global South, like, but especially within this hemisphere, like a lot of public. Sorry, there's a siren going on. Public education or public medical systems in particular, like they're trained and facilitated by Cuban doctors and medical missions that go to these countries and train doctors in their local population. And so that's also where the whole slogan comes from that, you know, they're on the state sponsor of like terror watch list, but Cuba exports doctors and teachers, not moms. And this is state supported. This isn't through an NGO. This isn't, again, like Marco Rubio calls it like human trafficking. It's not that. Like you can go listen to the stories of these folks in any country. So it's like also what Americans cannot accept, or people in this country in particular, you know, I don't want to say Americans, but like U.S. citizens can accept because of our ideological training here is that a majority of the world does not see Cuba the same way that we are trained to see Cuba here. You know, people see it with a lot of respect as a sovereign country that is able to maintain its own policy separate from the United States, which does not happen in a lot of countries. A lot of people see it as a, you know, haven for, again, these things like public services, like medical training, where, you know, I guess unless you have like access to private facilities in some of these countries, which is very difficult to have access to unless you're in that income level. You know, the only time you'll see U.S. doctors in these countries are in these private facilities. You know, it's not, you know, like if you go to Chile, like, you know, if you go to public facilities, you'll see like a lot of Cuban doctors or Cuban trained doctors. And so like, and if you go to private facilities, you see a lot of U.S. trained doctors. But that shows you the kind of like cultural difference of like what the priority is. Is the priority for profit, or is the priority for the well-being of the people? And that's also like when I was in Cuba, like we had on the 51st contingent, we were actually able to see the lab and the doctors and the researchers that were able to develop the systems of care for COVID and the vaccines for COVID in Cuba, which was a remarkable experience. And we see murals to those doctors and not even just the doctors, but like they mobilize like students and stuff like that to go house to house, checking in on people and stuff like that during COVID. And that's why their, you know, transmission rate was so low. And like, that's why they're able to like effectively handle that, where the United States was like, our capitalist countries were suffering so badly from that, you know? So.
And the U.S. was refusing to even look at the science behind the Cuban vaccine for COVID. And you know, just to throw in as well, guys, you have to understand that besides the doctors get a lot of shine, which they deserve their shine, but Cuba also tends to send out folks that are teachers, architects, all types of various forms of engineers all over Latin America, parts of Africa, parts of Asia, to go do this type of humanitarian work. And when you go with the VB, you get to meet with a lot of these brothers and sisters and folks that have been on these different brigades, architectural brigades, engineering brigades, literacy brigades, sending Cubanos from a little island in the Caribbean going to all over Africa, all over Asia, helping people learn to read. So it's an extraordinary experience, and with VB you get to socialize and talk and grow with a lot of those folks. As we're wrapping up, Chris, just tell us again, Papo, how do we contact the VB? If I want to go on one of these three brigades that's taking place throughout this year, or, I know May 1st is right around the corner, but if I want to go in July, if I want to go at the end of the year, where do I go? What do I do?
So we have a few ways to connect. So I think our email is vb4cuba at protonmail. We have a website that's vb4cuba.com. And we have an Instagram page that's also under the handle VB4Cuba. And we have local committees as well in places like California, the Pacific Northwest, Florida, and New York, New Jersey. And so if you want to connect with us, you can hit us up on Instagram. I think there's a contact way through the website and through email. So
folks, again, go on Instagram, look for VB for Cuba. The website is vb4cuba.com. An extraordinary experience. Going to Cuba is life-changing. The conversation, the education, the interaction, the arguments, and all of that great stuff. You bond with people very closely when you're on anywhere between an 8 to 16 day tour with a group of people where you're arguing and having talks and talking about contradictions and meeting with Cubans and working with them and having your own conversations and arguments with them. So it's an extraordinary experience. It is not tourism. It is not political propagandering trips. It's an extraordinary experience for folks. I've known people that have gone to Cuba that are diehard socialists, and people that have gone that are very much pro the Democratic Party, pro the U.S., but they were really interested in seeing what another society was like. So there's a gamut and a spectrum of people, and that's what that battle of ideas really exists on. It's having a spectrum, a bandwidth of people talking. So, Chris, thank you so much. Chris comes to us right now. He is in LA, right? He's in California. So thank you for talking with us. Mi gente, this has been your March edition of the Baron Titan. Thank you to our brother Chris for joining with us today. Thank you to our listening audience. We're going to do the YouTube commercial, guys. If you like this podcast, please share it. Please subscribe. Turn on the notifications so you know when you catch our next segment, which is about once a month. Again, I'm working hard on 2025 to get you maybe a second edition every other month or something like that. Como siempre, Cuba sí, bloqueo no.